All right, welcome to the Buffalo Built podcast. I'm very excited to sit down here with Bill Breeser, Mr. Niagara Street, as some people call you. But for those that do not know who you are, a little bit of introduction, who you are, what you're doing, and what you'd like to do with development.
Sure, try to give you my life story in about 2 minutes. Born and raised in Buffalo, public school 80, Hutch Tech for high school, Canisius for college. When I got out of college, I got a regular day job and started buying real estate on the side.
Yeah.
And have done that for the past 50 years now.
Wow. So you were born and bred in Buffalo.
Yes. Yeah.
What was that like?
You know, there was a time in the early 80s when I seriously thought about getting out of Dodge, and I never did. I'm happy to say I'm thrilled that I stayed here. You know, all family and friends are here. I've got a successful business and raised a wonderful family, so it's all been good.
It has been good. And what part of Buffalo did you grow up in?
Grew up on Winspear near Eggert Road, North Buffalo.
Yep.
And when I got out of college, moved over into the Elmwood Bidwell area and have been there ever since.
Okay. And kind of your journey from being born and bred in Buffalo to development. I feel like is it a long road to when you started getting into the real estate game?
So fresh out of college, I got involved with a couple of partners who were realtors, and we bought a couple of doubles on Grant Street.
Okay.
I went to my dear grandmother and borrowed $2,000 to get my auntie to get into the partnership, and paid it back in full and on time, so I established a little credit.
Yeah.
And then by the early 80s, I had roughly 24 units, and I was buying and flipping on average one place a year. And my wife and I did that for, probably 10 years or more.
Okay.
And got us into the 90s, and I'm Buffalo. I hadn't seen much appreciation in those 10 years, and so I decided to start buying businesses, and so did that in the early 90s and kind of divested myself of much of my residential property. But then in buying the businesses, oftentimes they come with a building. And so kind of got into the commercial game, which I had never been in before. And so, and that's where I've stayed for the past 30 some years now.
Yeah, well, dive in that one second. So one thing I truly did not know. So I'm going to say you started out like a lot of us. And when I say that, a lot of my generation, we're buying doubles, we're buying 4 units, we're flipping 1 or 2 houses a year. And you literally did the same thing we did. You know, a lot of our generation's doing now. And then from there, you didn't see appreciation, so you sold most of it.
Yep.
You bought businesses, started flipping businesses, or you?
A little bit of both, just like the houses. I had watched guys like Sal Alfieri and Lipke's with Gibraltar Steel, and a few other Buffalo people who had bought businesses and merged or fixed and sold, and so I thought, well, maybe I could do that in some small way, and so I started doing that in the early 90s.
Wow.
And I've literally bought and merged and or sold over a dozen businesses over the past 30 years.
That's amazing. You flip businesses.
All small businesses,
Yeah.
under $5 million a year in sales, under 50 employees.
And something that I've heard a lot of conversations is there's a lot of people that are starting to retire out of businesses. They're entrepreneurs their whole life. They're built these businesses probably 5 million or less in sales, and they're having trouble getting out, right? And there's good value to buy these businesses.
Yes.
So I suspect that's similar to what you were seeing then.
So I theorized in the early 90s, after having watched several friends' fathers, the kids go on to be doctors and lawyers and whatever, and they're not interested in dad's business. Smaller businesses, it's hard to find somebody internal to buy you out.
Yep.
It does happen. And oftentimes smaller businesses have 1 or 2 big customers that keep them going. And at that point in time with NAFTA and the Pacific Trade Agreement, there was a lot of guys that were losing that one key customer. And so all of a sudden their business wasn't viable anymore. And the business that I bought into, Better Wire Products, I did a little research, and there were literally hundreds, if not thousands, of small businesses in that SIC code that were under $5 million a year in sales and under 50 employees. So I figured, well, if Sal Alfieri and the Lipkes could do it, maybe I could do it.
Right. So you started buying mostly businesses inside the business you already had. So more to expand what you currently were doing.
Yep. So the first half a dozen businesses that I bought, the Better Wire was the first, and it was solid. But then I bought 4 or 5 more businesses that weren't solid and rolled them into Better Wire, cut out a bunch of the overhead, and so it made sense. And in the meantime, Better Wire was losing business to the Orient in Mexico, and finding new customers was difficult. So it was a way for me to keep feeding Better Wire and keep it at a healthy, profitable size.
And these other businesses you were buying and selling, were they in that same type of business, or was it a different?
So initially, yes, I stuck to that same type of metal fabricating type businesses. But then I wound up in the early 2000s buying a company called Emulso, local company Emulso, which made cleaning solutions and waxes and polishes and things like that, totally away from...
Completely. And you bought that and then sold it?
Yep, bought it, kind of fixed it up a little bit, and then sold it off.
And you made money?
Yes. And I made more money on the real estate end of it than I did on the business end.
And then the real estate side. That's really impressive. I had no idea. So you not only developer of real estate, but of businesses to be able to flip a business, which I know people talk about, but saying it and doing it are two different things. It gets pretty difficult.
Yeah.
What is the trick, do you think, if someone wanted to buy a business, maybe it's a boomer that wants to retire and get out, buy it for 3 to 5 years and sell it? What should they be looking for from your experience?
Well, that's a really long answer to that question, but certainly a solid customer base that is going to be there. Because if you buy a business like that and one of your key customers goes away, all of a sudden what was profitable isn't. And then life gets miserable fast.
Yeah, you don't want 50% of your sales from one customer, something like that.
Yeah,
you want to make sure you diversify. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So then we kind of go into the real estate side. So, you flipped doubles or owned doubles, flipped houses, started buying businesses. From the businesses, you started buying the assets, which was the real estate with the business.
Yep.
Were that all predominantly on Niagara Street, or was that all over Buffalo, or how did that start looking as you started amassing all of this commercial space?
Sure. So Better Wire was the first business on Niagara Street that came with the building, and then that was in the late 90s, and Niagara Street was not a place that you would walk around casually, especially at night. And so the buildings around me, there was a lot of dilapidated buildings, and so I gradually started buying them up just for self-preservation. I wanted to keep them boarded up and whatnot. And I was buying them cheap enough. I was buying them for $3, $4, $5 a square foot, and figured that the downside was minimal. And if I lived long enough, maybe I'd see it come back.
That's fair. And so you're just buying them and mothballing them essentially, or were you actually fixing them up at the time or expanding into them?
So some of them just buying and mothballing, boarding them up, and I had a couple maintenance guys on my staff, so make sure if they got graffitied, we'd paint it out right away, and if the roof leaked, we'd patch it, and so on and so forth. And then some of them gradually fixed up. So right across the street from Better Wire, 1250, 1270, we've converted that from what was storage and manufacturing when I bought it to it's probably over half commercial and retail now.
Yeah, and so at what point did the switch go from buying businesses to now converting this portfolio amassed on Niagara Street into, as a developer, right? Finding tenants, fixing it up, renovating it, doing build outs. Like, when did that start, and how did you start going about that?
So it's probably been like a 10-year slide from me spending most of my time on the manufacturing to me spending most of my time on the real estate. I'm fortunate to have a really good right-hand guy. We've been together for 18 years now, and he takes care of all the day-to-day operations for me. And it's a great relationship. He's wonderful. I'm so fortunate to have him.
And that's on the Better Wire side or on the development side?
Both. He initially came in on the Better Wire side to run the manufacturing operations. When he originally came in, I had 3 different businesses that he was overseeing, and then I sold one off, closed one down, over the past 15 years, and so I've gotten him more involved in the real estate side of things, operationally.
Sure. And so, but where was the switch as far as you went? You had these vacant buildings you were mothballing for several years, and Niagara Street was a little tougher then. Obviously, it's an amazing street and everything that's been built there. But when did that switch? When it was like, all right, let's start putting money into these buildings and finding tenants? So did you have to find the tenants first, or did you have to build it so they would come? Like, how did that?
So it was mostly opportunistic. Somebody would approach me and say, "Hey, have you got a couple thousand square feet?" And I'd be like, "Oh yeah, we can put up a couple walls and rent some space to you." Kind of the switch moment was I had tried to buy the Bison Storage building, which is now Crescendo, and I had an offer in on that building for $550,000, but it was contingent on bank financing. The seller came to me and said, "Look, if you can drop your financing contingent, I'll sell it to you, but otherwise I'm going to sell it to Ange Natali and his group for $500 cash." Well, that story played out, and I was just going to rent it out for storage. Ange Natali and his group came in and they did what they did to the building.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. The next step was the Menthol Atom building, which I put a bid in. I was on the market for $1 million. I put an offer in for $1 million, contingent on financing. Didn't hear back. Kept asking the realtor. Months later, I hear it sold to Simonelli for I think $2.3 million.
Wow.
And I was like, well, I'm out of my class there, out of my game, and B, that's like 2 blocks away from me. So, again, they went right in and renovated the building.
Yeah.
So in that time frame, I was like, okay, maybe I should put more effort into these Niagara Street buildings. Mm-hmm. At that time, I had purchased another manufacturing operation over on the east side of Buffalo and was originally going to move that to Niagara Street in with Better Wire. As this all started to unfold, I decided to move Better Wire to the east side of Buffalo over on New Babcock and start to renovate the buildings on Niagara Street.
That's amazing. And now you have all of the square footage. You move Better Wire over. You start with one building. You just start leasing them all and saying all of these are available. How'd you figure that out?
So I did it piecemeal as opposed to the big developers who go in and they're doing a project and it's all in, like the Barcelo place down in South Buffalo. I did it piecemeal. Low budget, patched together the financing, whether it was myself or whoever, and gradually start building out spaces one at a time, and let it be known that there was space available. And I have a lot of friends in the real estate business, so I never formally listed any of the property with anyone, but made them know that I would gladly pay a commission if you bring me a tenant.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I don't know if you remember. No, I actually called you probably a decade ago, seeing if you had space for my college storage and moving business. So I had a college storage and moving business at Buffalo State and UB. It was actually the very first business I ever started, and I had to find a space just for the summer. That was the hardest part, is I only needed to lease space from May to August or May to September, and it's hard to find that space. And Sue McCartney's like, "Oh, call this guy." So I called you, and I don't remember. I don't remember if it was the price. Really can't remember why we didn't do something, but yeah, it was word of mouth. Everyone knew that you had space and you were willing to do something.
Yep.
So that's very true. So, I suspect that you own these buildings outright, no loans on them, since you were buying them for pretty inexpensive, and they probably weren't bank financeable at the time.
So some of them just bought outright for cash. The 2 big buildings on Niagara Street, I have loans on, and I've refinanced them a couple times over the years to pull the equity out.
Once you fixed them up, though.
To put it back. Well, yes.
Right.
Fix them up so far, refinance them, pull some equity out, so I had cash to put back into the buildings.
Right. So were you doing it almost all your renovations? You'd fix up one building, get it rented out, refi, get money out, and then do the next one with that cash? Were you like kind of floating it forward there versus doing a construction loan per?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In some cases, just rolling money back into the same building. In some cases, taking that equity and rolling it into the next project.
That made it significantly easier to do the construction. Now you're not worried about construction loans, getting everything put in together where the bank likes it. Yep. So that was really smart. Being that it's on Niagara Street, I suspect some of the properties might not have been the cleanest. Did you go with any brownfield cleanups, or did you have to do any cleanups on any of those buildings, or were you lucky and they were all clean?
So several of the buildings have environmental issues, but nothing really evil. And to date, I have not done a brownfield cleanup project. I've looked at doing a couple, but I was able to, because they're commercial and not residential, the rules are a little bit easier.
That makes sense.
And so I was able to get around that. I've never shied away from a property with environmental issues, but for sure you want to be super careful. Make sure you've got a top-notch lawyer working for you. Advertisement, Phillips Lytle. As far as I'm concerned, they're the best.
Oh, that's very true. I mean, the one thing you got to be careful, even buying properties, a lot of times you should be doing a phase one, because if you're buying something that's contaminated and you didn't do your due diligence, you can really get in trouble if something ever obviously went down the pipeline there. When you were buying these back in the 80s and 90s, were you doing phase ones, or was that not really a thing back then?
Yep. On the advice of my attorneys, we always did a phase one.
Yeah.
You never know what you're going to find. And,
Right.
in one case in particular, we found some stuff and I was like, "Ooh, yeah, no, we're not going there."
Right.
So.
Right. Okay. And so what about other? Did you go after any other grants? Did you go after any sort of tax credits? Anything of those to help you with the development?
So along the way, we were able to get some small grants through Erie County storefront revitalization, working with our tenants and such. In 2007, I bought the building at the corner of Niagara and Breckenridge, where Mint is now located, 1225 Niagara. Building had been abandoned for years and it was a mess, and I was going to renovate it. Well, 2008, the real estate collapse happened, and so I put that on hold. In 2017, a decade later, I came back and said, okay, I'm going to do that project now. So I had mothballed it for 10 years.
Yeah.
And we wound up doing the historic tax credits. We got some grant money. I think it was through the Build Better Buffalo Billion or whatever the heck it was. And I think we got a little grant from National Fuel or National Grid. So kind of patched it together, and the historic tax credit project, my first project. It's financially, it's been marginal. Put too much into the building. If I had to sell it, I'm probably upside down. Cash flow's been okay. The pandemic hit in there, lost my commercial tenant, so was in the red for a few years. Mint came along, we got them in there. They've got a nice, successful business, and so cash flow's been back in the black for probably 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah, and we pieced through multiple different tax credits and grant programs. Some people shy away from tax credits. When I say tax credits, specifically historical tax credits. Yep. There's a lot you have to do with it, right? There's a lot of approvals you need. You need SHPO approval, you need all these things. What was your experience, and what did you learn from that experience that maybe you might do something different, or think about a future deal differently, knowing what you know now?
So the historic tax credit program in particular, most people who utilize that sell the tax credits to financial institutions, and in that process they get discounted. I was in a position where I could use the tax credits myself, so I got 100% of the value of the tax credits. That made a significant difference. The other important piece of the puzzle was, it was like a $2 million project, which is on the way too small for a historic tax credit project. You really need to get at least $5 million, preferably 10, in order to make all of the overhead of the program financially work. Lawyers, accountants, so on and so forth. So I learned a lot, and while it was not as financially rewarding as I had hoped it would be, here I am, 6, 8 years later, and I'm doing another historic tax credit project at the corner of the opposite end of the block, at the corner of Auburn and Niagara. Yeah,
no, I've done 2 tax credit projects. I actually did small ones. I still found it financially valuable. I took the tax credits like you're saying, so I've never had to sell any, but mine were small ones. Mine were both, I think both around $300,000, and still was well worth it in my mind. I mean, it was, how I looked at it, and I'm curious what your perspective was. Say there was a $250,000, $300,000 renovation. I think it only maybe cost us maybe 50K more to get it there to SHPO standards.
Yep.
So in my mind, I mean, you kind of do the offset. That's where I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously it's very rewarding where you get the tax credits back 100% year one in state, 5-year roll through federal.
Yep.
But I don't know, I was very impressed with it because I was always shied away because people always like, oh, it's not worth it. It's a lot of, your budget's going to be twice as much, things like that. And I didn't find it to be that way. But I was doing, both of them were duplexes in Allentown. But what was your experience? I mean, do you think it would have been significantly, or how much less do you think that development would have been if you didn't do tax credit projects, and would it have been viable otherwise?
So the project wouldn't have been viable otherwise for the tax credits and the grant money. And that's true also of this new project I'm working on. For me, that $2 million range, in that range, it's like almost too big to do what you referred to, and too small to really make the thing work financially. And the problem is that when you get to that level and there's grant money involved, you can't goof around. You got to have a legitimate big-time contractor, and you got to do everything by the book, and you got to document everything, and so it gets a little expensive on the clerical side of things.
That makes perfect sense, right? The plumber, one man in a van, very profitable.
Yes.
The plumber with a couple employees, not so profitable. They probably make more money if they did it by themselves. Big plumbing company, profitable, right? Yeah, that middle row is where it's like, yeah, right. It's right in that middle where it's not big enough, but not too small enough where it is impactful. That's really.
So for years, I put a lot of sweat equity into my properties, but I got to the point where I just physically couldn't do that anymore, and I was giving work to other people. And I found pretty quickly that the one man in a truck is, the guy that I could deal with. Price-wise, timing-wise, you get into a guy that's got a legitimate company with 10 trucks running around or something like that, and his prices are crazy because he's got overhead.
Yeah, that's exactly.
He's got to make it work. And so yeah, that's another part of it. The project was big enough that you had to get bigger contractors involved.
Right.
And that gets more expensive. And
It does. And one thing you mentioned earlier, which is something that I always was concerned when it comes to commercial properties, is vacancy. So typically it takes a lot longer time to fill a commercial storefront, a warehouse space, any of those things. It takes, your vacancy rate's usually a lot higher.
Yes.
On the reverse side, I believe, and you can verify, when you do get a good tenant, they stay a lot longer. So sort of offsets on the backside. What's your experience with that, and how do you, I guess, combat that vacancy into an opportunity somehow to make it work?
So that was one of the lessons that I learned early on in the commercial game. I was used to renting, 3-bedroom apartment, and you could rent those within 30 days, no problem. There's a market for that. The commercial space, I had one building in particular, a nice building. I bought it. I didn't think I'd have trouble renting it, and it sat vacant for years before I got it rented. So you definitely want to make sure you've got the staying power to carry that for an extended period of time.
And what have you learned as far as how do you lease it out quicker or market it better in order to fill it? Buffalo has a lot of vacant storefronts, even some restaurant space, warehouse space. Warehouse seems to be actually the easiest to lease of them all. But what's your experience as far, like, how do you win that battle against like your competition who is also trying to rent out something similar, because there is a lot of opportunity for a tenant to find a storefront?
Yes, yeah. So for me, because I've kind of done this very gradually, I haven't been in a rush. I haven't like renovated the whole building and now I have to get it leased up because I've got this debt that I have to cover. So it's been a little bit easier that way. It's worked for me because I did it gradually and I could handle it. And basically put a sign on the front of the building. And Niagara Street is a very high traffic street, so you talk to my realtor buddies and say, hey, this is available. If happy to pay a commission.
That's right. Well, you also have your own brokerage, right? You are a broker, I believe.
Yes,
right?
I have a real estate license that it's lapsed, but
okay, I won't mention that. So, someone wants to get into the commercial game. They don't want to do apartment buildings. They want to do warehouses, maybe restaurants, maybe storefronts. They want to go heavy commercial. what tips are you giving them? Is there a minimum they should be buying? Is there, location, 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 right? Obviously, they always say that. Like, is there certain thing they should be looking for when it comes to location? What tips would you give them that you've learned along the way if someone really wanted to go full on commercial, similar to how you are?
So, if you're getting started, obviously I'm not Benderson or Simonelli or Montanti or Palladino. When you're getting started, I think especially location is so often said in real estate, location, location, location. I'm on Niagara Street kind of coincidentally because of buying better wire products that was already there. And coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, Niagara Street's really come along in the past 30 some years here. So, but that location is, there's plenty of places you can go in the city. Chandlerville is another great example of, a neighborhood that I drove through for years and was like, ooh, boy, this is pretty scary. And now look at it.
Yeah, Chandler Street, no one would have ever known these buildings existed.
Yes.
Which is what's so impressive about there, because you say location, location, location. I don't know if Chandler Street necessarily hits that, right? It's off the beaten path. It doesn't have high traffic.
Yep.
I lived in this neighborhood in Black Rock. I didn't know these buildings existed until they started getting developed, to be honest. I knew Grove Street, never went one over.
Yeah.
So this still won without the location in my mind, right? So how is that possible at the same time?
So I think that in some sense there is a location because it's in a neighborhood, and you can, once you start to get some commercial retail things going, you've got this whole neighborhood to draw from to bring in, and word gets out in Buffalo, word gets out and you got anything good going on and people will swarm to it. The fact that I think it was Rocco, right, did the factory warehouse place up on Elmwood.
Elmwood and almost Great Arrow, just a hair over from that.
Yeah. And when that building got done, that drew attention. That one and the Pierce Arrow building, when those got done, it drew attention, and Chandler Street's a stone's throw from that. I think the location, while not Niagara Street or Hurdle or Elmwood, it's once it started getting developed and people were aware of it, it has good location.
No, proximity wise, I definitely see what you're saying. Besides location, commercial is heavily focused on price per square foot, right, on your purchase, right? And it's not just on the purchase, but on your lease rate, right? Maybe you want $8 per square foot or whatever that might be. So that's got to be pretty important, and as well is on the buy. There's a certain price per square foot they should be looking at, and the reason I'm actually getting to it, which is sort of to the follow-up, is I look at large warehouses down in even say Jamestown. You can buy these things for $10 a square foot. I'm just like, in my mind, I'm like, can you rent it out for $10 a square foot? And I'm sure you can't, but that's where I fall. It's like, location's important, but price per square foot is, and you were buying things at $4 or $5 a square foot back then. How does that play in a factor now?
Sure. So, 20 plus years, things have loosely speaking doubled. So what I was buying for $5 a square foot, you can probably buy for 10 or $20 a square foot now. And that pretty well plays out over time. There's, it's not a exact curve, but there's some definitely trending up. And sure, it's about the money. And when it's not about the money, it's about the money. If you can't make it work financially with a cushion, then don't do it. Because it's a lot like marrying the wrong person. It's a lot easier to get into than get out of.
That's right. Yes, it's true. What about your leases? So typically commercial is a lot of triple net leases. Is that usually what you go about, or do you do gross leases or something else?
Sure. So for loosely speaking, for 2,000 square feet and under, they typically wind up being gross leases because the cost of separating utilities and typically somebody that's renting a smaller space, they'd just rather have one payment. You get above 2,000 square feet, and then from the landlord's perspective, you want to protect yourself against, the taxes just went up 25%,
Exactly.
Oh, well, it's a triple net lease, it's on the tenant.
Exactly.
So for me, that 2,000 square feet, loosely speaking, is kind of the break point.
Sure. And how else do you kind of secure some of these commercial tenants? discounted in your first year, free rent for so much, tenant allowance. Like, how does that all get negotiated? Because, the fun part with commercial, and it's kind of like the Wild West. Like, there's no set rules, there's no set standard.
Yep.
You can go about a lease any which way, where residential relatively is cookie cutter.
Yep.
How do you typically go about those types of things? Because it's all negotiable. It's all very negotiable, and almost two leases are never the same. So how do you kind of impact, whether you give them a tenant allowance, tenant loan, how do you go through those ideas?
So I consider myself creative when it comes to financing and leases. And as long as it's not illegal, I'm willing to listen and structure a deal. At the end of the day, for me anyway, the structure of the deal is at least, if not more important than what the numbers actually are. So to your point, there's hundreds of ways to skin the cat. What works? You have this back and forth. I got a grant, so I got $250,000. Great, you're on for the build out.
Yeah.
Versus somebody that comes to you and, if they're rookies and they want to open a restaurant, I'm like, yeah, you don't know, if it's somebody with a ton of experience, I'm willing to gamble a little bit more. So
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's the one thing I always find it difficult is really the initial, because there almost always needs to be a build out.
Yep.
What percent of the time are you taking on, we'll say, the full cost? What percent are they doing the full build out? And when do you meet in the middle? Like, how does that typically go about?
I really shy away from me doing the whole build out. If they don't have some skin in the game, if they don't have the financial capability to have some skin in the game, then I probably don't want them as a tenant. They're way too risky. And at the end of the day, you got a lease. I mean, what are you going to do? Put the guy into, take his house, So yeah, generally, if it's a prospective tenant that there's a lot of build out required. If it's something simple like putting up partition walls, sure, that's not a big deal. But if you have to start putting in multiple bathrooms and whatever, upgrading the utilities and things like that, they're on for that.
Right, that makes sense. And being, you've developed a lot of these spaces. I mean, you have the brewery space, for instance. I mean, that's a stunning build out and almost was rebuilt out a decade later, which was pretty impressive because it was already a beautiful space. But what mistakes do you think newer developers might make, when going into a commercial space, doing a build out, doing the rehab, probably more specifically even the rehab and the construction? You were very savvy, you knew a lot of people, you were able to get these done probably a little bit less expensive than someone that doesn't have those connections. But what are mistakes that people are thinking, like, are they overdeveloping or you know what I mean? How does a newer development, what's a mistake they might make that you might have learned or could show?
So a couple of the lessons I learned the hard way at the School of Hard Knocks. It's always going to take longer and cost more than you think. And even as I got into it, and I was like, oh, I'll double that, and it still costs more and takes longer. Right? So as long as I think you, at least in the back of your mind, have that, so you're somewhat prepared to deal with it when it happens. And then if it comes in on time and under budget,
beautiful.
Woohoo!
Yes, right. That's fair. And so typically they need to have a contingency for that build out then. Is really the big part, is making sure they have 10%, 20% more than they're thinking it's going to take. Because if not, it could completely do it. But the other thing you did is you kind of did it in a lot of phases too. Right? So instead of taking this whole building, develop it at once, you're like, okay, I'll take this corner and I'll take the middle. And you kind of did it that way, which in one way, it's like, okay, well then it took you forever to maybe potentially refi out and be self-sufficient. But at the same time, cost of money, cost of capital, is very easy to transition through it.
Yes.
Is that what you would recommend too, is to kind of go more methodically?
For me, being a small developer, that worked much better. It's not that I'm risk averse, but I want the odds in my favor. And if you go out and get a $5 million loan on something and try to renovate it and get it, and you're just getting started, that's a huge risk. And boy, there's so many things, there's so many variables. For me, I didn't have the stomach for that. So I'd take it in chunks of hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time that I knew I could manage. And if something bad happened, it wasn't going to drag me under.
Yeah.
So that for me was, when I was young, cavalier, no wife, no kids, I'd take huge risks. And, if it went south, well, I'm eating beans for a while. But as I got a little bit older, I got more conservative, and my philosophy became, make sure it can't drag you under. If the worst thing happens, you can deal with it. You might not like it, but you can deal with it.
So, I'm looking at doing more development now. I'm currently closing hopefully soon on 2 schools that I'm going to convert into residential units. And that thing you just mentioned there is what I think about. It's like, what am I missing? What am I not thinking about that could drag me under, that would make me and my wife and kids have to eat beans, like you're saying? And how do you kind of get ahead of that? How do you, because I want to do more, right? And development takes a long time, right? So you buy these schools, we're looking at 1-2 years till not even 2 years till the lease up's going to probably start. How do you navigate that? How should I navigate that to make sure that this development doesn't put me under?
Yep.
Right.
So it sounds like you've got enough experience at this point that it's not your first project. So that's key. I wouldn't put myself in that position if it was my first project, but that's me. The other thing that for me, it took me a while to learn, is there's certain things in my control and certain things outside my control. So when the interest rate doubled here a few years back, and all of a sudden my mortgages started resetting, way outside my control. And it's not like I can just pass that along to my tenants. Gradually, that whole thing will work its way out. But yeah, trying to make sure you understand what you can control and what is outside your control. And then, is it a risk I'm willing to take?
Yeah.
Do I have a team around me of really good people, so that if this thing's not going in the right direction, I know I've got people around me to help me deal with it and get through it?
Sure. The one thing I was also thinking with this specific project is we're doing historic tax credits for it. And if it went over, we're still getting 45 cents on the dollar back. So it's like every dollar that's over, we're at least still getting 45% back or so.
Yep.
So that's kind of the other way. It's like, if, and I feel like our numbers are safe. We've triple checked them and everything like that, right? Like, feel pretty good, and we definitely are erring high on a lot of the items.
Yep.
Hopefully high enough.
Yep.
But at the same time, that's how I was also trying to look at it. Yeah, we could weather the storm, right? If we had to pay another $500,000 outside the construction loan that we're already doing, sure, we can do it, and we'll at least get $250 back.
Yeah.
So that was the other way I was trying to figure out, is that a good way to maybe leverage that in order to have that safety net?
Sure. I'm a big fan of building in those cushions and being, I tend to be optimistic, but in situations like that, be a bit pessimistic. What can happen? If this happens, what do I do? Not get there and be like, oh, didn't think of that.
Yep. Yeah, fully thinking through. Yeah, the one other thing, I on the team, we have a developer who's done several of these projects as well. So I'm lucky to have a mentor that's also partner in this project to kind of lead the way, because it certainly is help is, just the idea of this podcast on top of it is mentorship is everything, right? There's so much knowledge that you have and other developers have that actually pretty amazingly want to share and help other people, right? It's not a secret, if you will. It's not a big boys club. It's something that people are willing to share and help out, and we're lucky to have that on the project too.
Yeah. Having a good team around you, it for me has been critical. It's mostly winners, but there have been a few that maybe they weren't losers, but didn't do so good on.
What'd you learn from those losers?
A couple of years ago, a couple of doubles that I kind of got a little too, I wanted to do the right thing, and I put a little too much money into them, and then I'm trying to remember, we had a hard time renting them. We had to drop the rents, so then the cash flow wound up being, it was like break even as long as I didn't have any vacancies. The minute I had a vacancy, it was negative cash flow. So, I would guess crunching the numbers, like you said, when you're doing that, if anything, be a little pessimistic, not overly optimistic.
Right, 'cause it's really money in your pocket at that point.
Yep.
You've been in Buffalo your whole life. What is, if you put your developer cap on, I give you an unlimited loan with 0% interest, I don't know, make it up. But what is one thing you would build that would really be a positive impact for Buffalo? What is the one development that would maybe produce more jobs, produce more activity, culture? I don't know what it would be, but what's one thing that you think Buffalo is missing that potentially a developer in the future could do that would maybe be a secret ingredient that really help the city?
So, having been born and raised here, gone to Hutch Tech for high school in downtown Buffalo, I've witnessed Chippewa was the red light district when I was in the early 70s when I was going to high school down there. So to see that whole neighborhood, if you will, turn around and watch what has happened in other pockets of the city, and then see the effect that the medical campus has had on the number of jobs. Jobs are so critical. I mean, my whole life, people were leaving because Bethlehem shut down and, this company shut down and so on and so on. And the population of Buffalo kept drifting lower and lower. It affects the real estate values. It affects people's ability to maintain their homes. So having that, the one thing that Buffalo could do is encourage developers rather than discourage them. There's, I guess whatever city you go to, people are going to whine about things, but whatever the city can do to encourage development, in my experience, the developers by far and away are not the bad guys. And to try to work with them and make good things happen is critical.
Absolutely, and kind of working with the developer on Niagara Street. I mean, you're doing wonderful things there. Some other developers are doing wonderful things there. And obviously, they have the beautiful Niagara Street they redid a couple years ago. Just as everyone's working together, and now you have this amazing community that developers kicked off. They put their own money, you put your own trust in this neighborhood, and you started putting your own finances in there. They're seeing it. They fixed the street up. They put the bike lane, bike path? What is it? Bike lane, thank you. Bike lane in, which I run on, but and it's just now you have this beautiful synergy, right? So it's working with the developers, not against it, which makes the largest impact for a neighborhood.
One of the key anchors in that neighborhood is Rich Products, who's been there forever, and stop. And the fact that they chose to stay there, they didn't have to. They can go wherever they want in the world. The fact that they chose to stay there and further develop, most recently, I don't know if it's a subsidiary or a related company, Roar Logistics, bought the old Agway building and are developing that, which has been, God, for 30 years, it's been a mess. So I think that was one of the keys to have that anchor there.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for sitting down. I really appreciated the advice, the commercial advice on top of that, and really teaching us and telling us your story.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Of course, Bill.